It wasn't supposed to end like this. When Lily first brought up the party, I didn't think much of it. We'd been married long enough for me to understand her usual nights out. A casual evening with Chloe and her friends, some drinks, maybe a bit of dancing, nothing too wild. At least, that's what I used to believe. But this time, something felt off. Maybe it was the nonchalant way she mentioned it. Or perhaps it was because Chloe had a reputation for hosting parties where anything could happen. I tried not to dwell on it, but the feeling gnawed at me. I knew Lily well enough to notice the small changes. The way she seemed distracted lately, her unexplained late nights. We had fought about it before, but this time it felt different, more serious. Like something important was slipping away. The night before the party, I laid out my feelings. "I don't think you should go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not that I don't trust you, Lily, but recently, I don't know, it feels like we're on different wavelengths." I didn't expect her reaction. "You're being paranoid again," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "It's just a party. Chloe's hosting it, not some stranger. Why do you always overreact?" That word, always, hit me harder than I anticipated. She made it sound like I was constantly breathing down her neck, drowning her in suspicion, but that wasn't true. I'd always tried to give her space, to trust that our connection was strong enough to handle anything. Yet lately, she had been pulling away, emotionally and physically. We lived under the same roof, but I could feel the growing chasm between us. "I'm not trying to control you," I insisted, fighting to keep calm. "I'm just telling you how I feel. Something about this party doesn't sit right with me. Can we at least talk about it?" She rolled her eyes, dismissing me, like my worries were nothing but baseless paranoia. "Talk about what? You're acting like the moment I walk through that door, I'll run off with some guy. It's just one night out, for God's sake." But that wasn't it. It wasn't just one night out. It was the culmination of months of distance, the late nights with vague excuses, her absence even when she was present. I felt like I was losing her piece by piece, and this party felt like a breaking point. Yet, instead of pressing the issue, I let it go. I don't know why. Maybe I was exhausted from always being the one trying to fix things, while she seemed to drift further away. So, when she left that night, I didn't stop her, but I couldn't relax either. As the hours crawled by, I found myself pacing the house, my mind spiraling with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. The silence was suffocating. By midnight, I hadn't heard anything from her. Not a call, not a text, just an empty, quiet house. I made a choice then, one that would change everything. I picked up my phone, opened the tracking app we'd installed when she kept losing her phone, and decided to follow her. It felt wrong, invasive even, but at that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know where she was, what she was doing. I needed the truth, no matter how harsh it turned out to be. The app loaded, and her location appeared. I expected to see her at Chloe's place or maybe a nearby bar. Instead, it showed something that made my heart sink, a motel on the outskirts of town. I stared at the screen, trying to process it. A motel? What on earth was she doing there? My heart began to race, anger and dread boiling up inside me. This wasn't just about a party. Something else was going on, something I hadn't dared to believe. Without another thought, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The drive to Greenwood Lodge felt like an eternity, though it probably took just 20 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, my heart thumping louder with every mile. I kept glancing at my phone, watching the little dot that marked Lily's location. Still at the motel, still not moving. A part of me wanted to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen it. I hoped it was a mistake, that she was there for an innocent reason, and I was just overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. The distance between us in recent months wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't just stress or work. It was something else, something darker. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I parked away from the building, not wanting to be noticed. There were only a few cars around, none of them familiar. I sat there for a moment, hands still clutching the wheel, staring at the sign for Greenwood Lodge, its neon letters buzzing faintly in the dark. The place looked run down, the kind of spot people chose when they wanted to go unnoticed. Cheap, discreet, the perfect setting for secrets. I opened the app again, hoping for something different, but the dot hadn't moved. Lily was still there. She was still there, in one of those rooms. The room number wasn't listed, but it wasn't hard to narrow it down. There were only a few possibilities. I stepped out of the car, forcing myself to breathe steadily, trying not to picture the worst. The cold night air didn't help. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Lily, in a room with someone else, laughing, smiling, doing all the things she hadn't done with me in months. As I walked past the first few rooms, each one marked with a faded number, 201, 202, 203. I slowed down as I reached the end of the row, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw it. Her car, parked discreetly at the far end, almost as if she didn't want anyone to notice. That was all the confirmation I needed. I stood there for a moment, staring at her car, the reality hitting me like a ton of bricks. There was no more denying it, no more excuses to make. She was here, at a motel, and there was no good explanation for it. The trust we had was obliterated, replaced by something I didn't want to admit. I approached the room closest to her car, my fists clenched at my sides. Room 214. The blinds were drawn, but the faint glow of a lamp spilled out from the edges. My breath caught in my throat. Did I really want to know what was happening behind that door? Did I want to see it with my own eyes? I had no choice. I had to know. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped just inches from the door. Instead, I pressed my ear against it, listening. At first, there was only silence, but then faint voices, hers, laughing softly. A man's voice followed, muffled, but clear enough to ignite a surge of rage inside me. I didn't need to hear anything more. Without thinking, I banged on the door, hard. The voices inside abruptly stopped. I heard shuffling, panicked whispers. My mind raced, my body trembling with adrenaline. I knocked again, louder this time. The door finally creaked open, just a sliver. Lily stood there, her face pale, her expression one of pure shock. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, as if she'd been caught in the middle of something she couldn't explain away. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low, her eyes darting around, checking if anyone was watching. I didn't care about causing a scene. "What am I doing here? What are you doing here?" I shot back, pushing the door open wider. Inside, I could see the room clearly now. A bed with rumpled sheets and a man sitting on the edge, looking equally stunned. He was a stranger to me, just some random guy. Exactly what I'd feared. Lily quickly stepped out, pulling the door closed behind her, trying to block my view. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, her voice unsteady, but her eyes betrayed her. She was scrambling, desperate to regain control of the situation. I laughed, bitter and cold. "Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is." I couldn't believe this was happening. After everything, after all the chances I'd given her, she had still ended up here, doing this. She reached for my arm, pleading. "Let me explain," her voice trembling, but I pulled away, disgusted. "Explain? Explain what, Lily? You're here, in a motel, with him," I said, my voice hard, each word weighted with the full force of her betrayal. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, she couldn't talk her way out of it, and that's when I knew. It was over. There was nothing left to save. Everything I'd held on to, every bit of hope, was shattered in that moment. Lily's hand dropped to her side, the shock on her face quickly morphing into something colder, more defensive. She was already calculating her next move. The man inside hadn't even bothered to come out. He just sat there, probably hoping I'd leave quietly, too cowardly to face the damage he'd helped cause. "This isn't how you think it is," Lily said, her voice steadier now, like she was trying to regain some control. But it was too late. I had seen enough. "Just let me explain, okay? Can we go somewhere and talk?" she asked, her voice softening, as if that could make any difference. I shook my head, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "Talk? What's there to talk about, Lily? You're standing in front of a motel room with another man. I've been worried sick, thinking something was wrong with us, and here you are, proving me right. She glanced back at the door, her eyes flicking toward the guy inside, then back to me. Panic flashed across her face. I could see her trying to think of a way to spin this, to downplay what had happened. "It's not what you think," she insisted. "Things haven't been right between us for a while, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I came here to clear my head." "Clear your head?" I interrupted, my voice rising with anger. "Is that what you call this? I don't need to hear your excuses, Lily. You're caught. Don't insult me by pretending this is anything but what it is." She took a step toward me, her expression softening, as if she still believed she could fix this, like she could manipulate the situation. "I'm sorry, okay? I messed up. I know I did. But let's go somewhere and talk about this. We can figure it out." Figure it out. The words echoed in my head, hollow and meaningless. How could there be anything left to figure out when the person I thought I knew had been lying to me for months? I took a step back, creating more space between us. "No, Lily, you don't get it. I'm done. There's nothing left to figure out. You made your choice the moment you stepped into that room. You didn't care about us then, and you don't care now." She opened her mouth, probably to say something, but I cut her off before she could speak. "Was it worth it?" I asked, my voice lower now, not out of anger, but exhaustion. I was tired, drained from months of carrying the weight of our crumbling relationship alone. Was it worth blowing up everything we had? Because I'm done fighting for someone who already walked away. For a moment she was silent, her eyes falling to the ground. Her facade cracked just enough for me to see the guilt underneath. But that guilt wasn't for me. It was for herself. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught. This wasn't unfolding the way she had imagined. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I didn't think it would get this far." I stared at her, incredulous. "Get this far? Lily, you've been lying to me for months. You've been disappearing, making excuses, and I've been sitting at home like an idiot, thinking it was my fault. And now you're telling me you didn't mean for it to get this far? That's all you have to say?" She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Please, I don't want this to be the end. We can fix this. I'll end it with him. I swear, I'll make it right." I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. It was the laugh of someone who had finally hit their breaking point, someone who understood just how far beyond saving things had gone. "End it with him? It's already over, Lily. The moment you decided to lie, the moment you chose someone else over us, it was done. You don't get to make it right now." That's when the tears came. Whether they were real or not, I couldn't tell anymore. She stood there, wiping her eyes, trying to look remorseful, but it didn't matter. The damage was done, and no amount of tears would change that. I felt nothing but cold, hollow resignation. "You need to leave," I said quietly, my anger replaced by exhaustion. "Go back inside. Do whatever you want, but don't come home. We're done." She shook her head, panic flashing across her face again. "Please don't say that. Don't just throw us away like this." "Throw us away?" I repeated, feeling my anger surge one last time. "You already did that. I'm just finishing what you started." I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last, but also more certain. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the regret on her face, didn't want to hear any more of her lies or apologies. As I got into my car, the weight of it all hit me. It was over. Years of marriage, of love, of trust, gone in a single night. And yet, as I drove away from Greenwood Lodge, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. It was like I had been carrying this unbearable burden for months, trying to fix something that was already broken. Now at least the truth was out. The fight was finally over. As I drove away from the motel, the weight of the night settled in. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The city lights blurred past, and the adrenaline that had kept me going began to fade, leaving a numbness that seeped into my bones. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I just felt empty. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Not with some half-hearted apology outside a rundown motel. Not with Lily pleading for something we both knew was already gone. I had spent years believing we could work through anything, that the rough patches we hit were temporary. But standing there in that parking lot, watching her lies crumble, I realized something. The Lily I married wasn't there anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for a long time. I pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of our house offering no comfort. It looked the same, but everything felt different. This wasn't home anymore. It was just a house. A place where two people had drifted apart, clinging to something that had died long ago. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the front door, knowing that once I stepped inside, everything would change. I didn't have the energy to face it yet. Not the memories, not the silence. So I sat there, replaying the last few months in my head. Every moment I should have seen the signs. The late nights out with no explanation, the way she'd come home and act like nothing was wrong, even as the distance between us grew. The times I tried to talk to her, tried to connect, and she'd shut me down, dismissing my concerns like I was imagining things. How long had she been cheating? How long had she been hiding this from me? I could feel the bitterness rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. There was no point in being angry anymore. The truth was I had already lost her months ago. I was just too stubborn to see it. Finally, I forced myself to step out of the car and walk inside. The house was dark, quiet, just like it had been when she left earlier that night. I tossed my keys on the counter and stood there in the kitchen, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I glanced at the clock. It was 2 a.m. She'd be back soon, or at least I thought she would. The fight outside the motel had been raw and brutal, but I knew Lily well enough to know she wouldn't just disappear. She'd come home, try to explain, to convince me it was all a mistake, that we could fix this. But I was done. I walked to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sank into the couch, staring blankly at the wall. I took a long drink. The taste was bitter, but I didn't care. I needed something, anything, to cut through the emptiness that was settling in. My mind drifted back to the night we first moved into this house. We had been married for 2 years, still in that honeymoon phase where everything felt perfect. I remembered how excited Lily had been, how we'd spent hours unpacking, laughing, talking about our future. We had plans, big plans, kids, vacations, a life we were going to build together. That all seemed like a lifetime ago. Now, all I could think about was the look on her face when she opened that motel door, the panic, the guilt, but also the lies. Even caught red-handed, she tried to twist it, to act like there was something left to salvage, as if we could sweep it all under the rug and go back to pretending everything was fine. But there was no going back. Not anymore. The front door creaked open, and I heard her footsteps in the hallway. She paused, probably unsure if I was still here. I didn't move, didn't say anything. I just sat there, sipping my beer, staring at the wall, knowing what was coming next. She stepped into the living room. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale. She looked different now, like the weight of what she'd done was finally sinking in, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. She sat down in the chair across from me, not daring to come any closer. For a moment, we just sat in silence, the distance between us feeling like miles. "Can we talk?" she whispered, her voice shaky. I didn't respond at first. I didn't even look at her. I just took another sip of my beer, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "What is there to talk about?" I finally said, my voice cold, detached. "You've said enough." She looked down, wiping her eyes. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I swear it wasn't what it looked like." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter and raw. "It wasn't what it looked like? Lily, I caught you in a motel room with another man. How much worse could it be?" "It was a mistake," she pleaded, her voice cracking. I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things between us, and I made a horrible choice, but it's not what you think. I finally turned to look at her, my eyes hard. "You cheated, Lily. You lied. And you're still lying even now. Just admit it. Stop pretending this is something it's not." She flinched at my words, fresh tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm not lying. I know it looks bad, but it was a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything. I was lost, and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to deal with everything." I stared at her, the anger inside me simmering. Not the kind that explodes, but the cold, settled kind, the kind that makes you realize you're done. "It's over, Lily," I said quietly, setting down my beer. "There's no fixing this. You made your choice. Now live with it." She shook her head, her voice rising in desperation. "Please don't say that. I love you. I don't want to lose you." I stood up, walking toward the hallway. "You already did." As I left the room, I could hear her sobs, but I didn't stop. The truth was out, and it was time to let go. I walked down the hallway to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. Lily's sobs echoed faintly from the living room, but I blocked them out. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of everything pressing down on me. It was a strange feeling, not the explosive anger or heartbreak I'd expected, but a hollow kind of finality. I knew this was it. The room felt colder than usual, like it wasn't mine anymore. My eyes scanned the familiar space, the pictures on the walls, the little details of a life we had built together. Photos from vacations, wedding day smiles, mementos of moments that once felt perfect. But none of it seemed real anymore. It was like looking at someone else's life, someone else's memories. I stared at a picture of us from our honeymoon, on a beach somewhere far away, where we'd laughed like nothing in the world could touch us. How had it all fallen apart so fast? Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe it had been crumbling for a long time, and I just hadn't seen it until now. Or maybe it hadn't been fast. Maybe it had been crumbling for a long time, and I just hadn't noticed until it was too late. Maybe Lily's betrayal was only the final nail in a coffin we'd been building together, brick by brick. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I didn't answer, but Lily pushed the door open anyway. Her face was tear-streaked and pale, as though she was desperate to say one last thing that could change my mind. "Can we just talk, please?" she whispered, standing hesitantly in the doorway, like she knew deep down there was nothing left to say. I looked at her for a moment. The woman I had once loved, the woman I had built a life with. Now, she looked like a stranger. Someone who had made choices I couldn't understand. Someone who had taken everything we had and thrown it away for a moment of selfishness. "What is there to talk about, Lily?" I said, my voice flat. "Do you think more words are going to change anything? That we can somehow go back to the way things were? We're past that. Way past it." She stepped into the room, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold everything together. "I know I ruined things," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll end it with him." "I'll end it," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "There's nothing left to end, Lily. I don't care about him. I don't care about your excuses. The moment you walked into that motel room, you ended us." Her face crumpled at my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you. We can fix this. I know we can." I shook my head slowly, the sadness in my chest mixing with something colder. "You love me?" I repeated, my voice quiet. "Are you sure about that? Because it doesn't feel like love, it feels like guilt. And guilt isn't enough to fix what you've broken." She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands, her sobs growing louder. But I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't reach out for her like I used to, because the truth was, I didn't trust her anymore. Not after this. Not after what she'd done. I stood up, the decision already solidified in my mind. "I'm leaving, Lily," I said, my voice steady. "I can't stay here and pretend we can fix this. We're done." She looked up at me, panic flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean you're leaving? Where will you go?" I didn't have an answer. I hadn't thought that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in this house. I couldn't stay in this life we'd built on a foundation of lies. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'll figure it out. I just know I can't stay." She stood up, reaching for me, her voice desperate. "Please don't go. Don't just walk out like this. We can go to therapy. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stepped back, out of her reach, shaking my head. "No, Lily. This isn't something therapy can fix. You crossed a line and there's no coming back from it. You made your choice and now I'm making mine." The silence between us was heavy, unbearable. For a brief moment, I almost regretted it. Almost wished I could go back to when things were simple, when we were happy. But those days were gone, and pretending otherwise would only drag us both down further. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and began throwing in a few essentials. Clothes, my laptop, anything I might need for a few days away. Lily watched, her face crumpling with every item I packed. It was as if each piece of clothing was a symbol of what I was taking with me, the final remnants of the life we had shared. When I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder, she stepped in front of me, blocking the door. "You can't just leave," she said, her voice trembling. "I love you. Please don't throw us away like this." I met her eyes, feeling the weight of her words, but knowing deep down that they were too little, too late. "I'm not throwing anything away, Lily. You did that. I'm just walking away from the wreckage." I stepped around her and walked out of the bedroom. The house felt colder, emptier than it ever had, but I didn't look back. I didn't let myself hesitate. The front door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to freedom. The moment the door closed, the weight of everything began to lift. It wasn't a rush of relief like I'd hoped for, but a quiet emptiness. The kind of silence that only comes after a storm, where the wreckage is scattered around, but at least the storm itself has passed. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the quiet street. I had no plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house another second. The life I had built with Lily was over, and now I had to figure out how to rebuild something new, something that didn't involve her. I drove aimlessly for a while. The streets were empty at this late hour, and my mind raced, though strangely I felt numb. I replayed every word we'd exchanged, every desperate plea she'd made, but none of it changed the cold, hard truth of what had happened. Lily had broken something between us that couldn't be fixed, no matter how many apologies or tears she offered. After about 20 minutes, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a cheap motel. I parked in the back, the irony not lost on me considering where the night had started, but I wasn't in the mood for reflection. I just needed a place to crash, a place where I could think without the weight of that house hanging over me. The motel was as run down as I expected. Flickering fluorescent lights in the hallway, thin walls, and the smell of stale smoke clinging to the air. But I didn't care. I paid for the room in cash, checked in, and walked down the dimly lit corridor, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. When I opened the door to my room, it was just as depressing as I imagined. Cheap furniture, a bed that looked like it hadn't been comfortable in years, and a flickering TV I had no intention of turning on. But it didn't matter. This wasn't home. It wasn't supposed to be. It was just somewhere I could exist for the night without having to think about what came next. I tossed my duffel bag onto the bed and sat down beside it, running my hands through my hair, trying to calm the storm in my head. It felt strange. This was the first time in years that I was truly alone. No Lily, no pretending that things were fine. Just me, sitting in a cheap motel room, trying to process how my life had unraveled in a single night. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, unsure of who to call, if anyone. Ryan, my best friend, would probably be asleep by now, and I wasn't sure I was ready to explain everything yet. I scrolled through my contacts, hovering over his name for a moment before setting the phone down. The truth was, I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, the silence pressing in around me. My mind wandered back to the argument in the bedroom, the way Lily had begged me to stay, to forgive her, to fix things. But what she didn't understand was that some things can't be fixed. You can't just patch over a betrayal like this and hope it'll heal. Trust isn't something you can piece back together once it's shattered. I had given her everything, years of my life, my loyalty, my trust, and she had thrown it away for someone else, for whatever thrill or escape she thought she needed. It wasn't just the act of cheating. It was the lies, the months of distance, the way she had let our marriage rot from the inside while pretending everything was fine. I turned onto my side, the motel bed creaking under me, and tried to close my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying the moment I saw her at Greenwood Lodge, the way she had looked at me, the panic in her eyes when she realized she was caught. It was like a broken record in my head, playing over and over, refusing to let me forget. I grabbed my phone again and scrolled through old photos, pictures of me and Lily from better days. There was one of us on a hike, smiling at the camera, arms around each other, looking like the perfect couple. It was hard to believe that the people in those photos were the same ones who had stood in that bedroom hours ago, tearing each other apart. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow over everything. I woke up groggy, the stiffness in my neck reminding me this place was no refuge. It took a moment for the fog in my mind to clear, but then the events of last night rushed back. That hollow ache in my chest returned, though it felt more distant now. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and glanced at the phone next to me. I half expected to see a flood of missed calls and texts from Lily, but there was nothing. Part of me was relieved. Another part of me wondered if she had given up trying to reach me, or if she was simply waiting for me to come crawling back. But I wasn't going back. I knew I needed to talk to someone. I couldn't keep it all bottled up. Ryan had been through his own rough patches, and he was one of the few people I trusted enough to let in on this. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to his name, hesitating for a second before pressing call. He picked up after a couple of rings, his voice groggy but concerned. "Hey man, everything all right?" I swallowed, trying to find the right words. "No," I said, finally, my voice cracking a little. "I left her, Ryan. I'm at a motel right now." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause where you can tell someone is piecing together the right response. "What happened?" he asked, his voice softer now. He knew this wasn't just some minor fight. "She's been cheating on me," I said, the words coming out bitter and raw. "I caught her last night at a motel with some guy." Ryan let out a low whistle, the kind of sound you make when you're trying to process something too big, too awful to fully grasp. "Damn. I'm sorry, man. I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I," said. "I mean, I had my suspicions, but not like this. It's been going on for months. I confronted her, and she just kept trying to lie her way out of it. But it's over. I'm done." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Where are you now?" "Some crappy motel on the edge of town. I just needed to get out of the house. I couldn't stay there." "You want me to come by? We can grab breakfast or something, talk it through." The thought of having someone there, someone who wasn't part of this tangled mess, felt like a lifeline. "Yeah," I said, feeling a small sense of relief. That'd help. We agreed to meet at a diner nearby, and as I got ready, I realized just how much I needed that conversation. I couldn't carry this burden on my own anymore. The kind of sound you make when you're trying to process something too big, too awful to really grasp. "Damn, I'm sorry, man. I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I. I mean, I had my suspicions, but not like this. It's been going on for months. I confronted her and she kept trying to lie her way out of it, but it's over. I'm done." Ryan was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Where are you now?" "Some crappy motel on the edge of town. Just needed to get out of the house. I couldn't stay there." "You want me to come by?" "We can grab breakfast or something, talk it through." The thought of having someone there, someone who wasn't part of this tangled mess of emotions, felt like a lifeline. "Yeah," I said, feeling a small sense of relief. That would help. We agreed to meet at a diner not far from where I was staying, and as I got ready, I realized just how much I needed this conversation. I couldn't carry this burden on my own anymore. The drive to the diner was short, but it felt like miles, like I was leaving behind the ruins of the life I had built and stepping into something new. It wasn't liberation yet, but it was a start. Ryan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a booth in the corner with 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. He waved when he saw me, his expression one of sympathy and concern. As I sat down, he pushed a cup toward me, knowing I'd need it. "So," he said, leaning forward, his hands wrapped around the coffee mug. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the weeks of distance, the growing suspicions, the lies Lily had spun. I told him about tracking her to the motel, the confrontation, the way she tried to twist the truth even when she was caught. I laid it all out piece by piece, like unloading a weight I had been carrying for too long. Ryan listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his expression grim. When I finished, he leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "Man, I'm sorry. There's no excuse for what she did, but I'm glad you left. You can't come back from something like that." I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. Yeah, I thought maybe we could fix things, but after last night, there's nothing left to fix. So, what's your plan now? He asked, genuinely curious. I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't had time to. I don't know yet, I admitted. I guess I'll have to go back to the house at some point, figure out the next steps. Divorce, probably move out. The words felt foreign, like they didn't belong to me yet. Ryan gave me a sympathetic look. If you need a place to crash, my couch is always open. You don't need to be alone in that house right now. The offer was tempting, and I knew he meant it. But something in me wanted to face it head on. I needed to go back, to see the life I had left behind, if only to make sense of it all. Thanks, I said, managing a small smile. I might take you up on that, but I think I need to go back. Just not yet. We spent the next hour talking, not just about Lily, but about everything. Life, work, the small things that felt normal in a world that suddenly didn't. It was comforting, in a way, knowing that even when your life falls apart, some things stay the same. Ryan had a way of making things seem simpler, reminding me that this wasn't the end. It was just a really painful chapter. As we finished breakfast and stepped out into the cool morning air, I realized something. I wasn't as alone as I thought. I had friends. I had a life outside of the mess with Lily. And for the first time since last night, I felt a flicker of hope. Not the naive hope that things would go back to the way they were, but the hope that I could rebuild. That maybe, just maybe, I could find myself again in the wreckage. You'll get through this, Ryan said, clapping me on the shoulder as we said goodbye. You're stronger than you think. I nodded, watching him drive away, the morning sun climbing higher into the sky. And as I got back in my car, I realized that he was right. I didn't feel strong now. I didn't feel like I had any control over my life, but I had made the first step, and sometimes that's all you can do. I sat in my car outside the diner for a moment, watching the sunlight brighten the world around me. It felt like the first time I had really seen daylight in months, even though it had only been hours since I'd walked out of that house. It was a strange sensation, being on the edge of something new with no clear idea of what the next step would be. But at least I was moving. That was enough for now. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. There was still the house to deal with. Still Lily. But instead of feeling the crushing weight of all the decisions ahead, I felt a sliver of calm. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time I wasn't looking backward. I wasn't thinking about what I could have done differently or how I'd let things get to this point. What was done. I decided to head back to the house, not because I wanted to see her, but because I needed to start taking back control of my life. I needed to face the mess, to confront whatever remained. I wasn't the same person who had walked out the night before. That person had been consumed by rage and betrayal, clinging to a faint hope that things could still change. But now, I was just ready to move on. The drive back felt faster than usual, as if my mind had clicked into a new gear, focused on what had to be done. The house came into view, our house, though it no longer felt like it belonged to us. It was just a place where two people had lived, but only one had cared about staying. When I pulled into the driveway, Lily's car was still parked out front. A small part of me had hoped she'd be gone by now, but I knew better. She wasn't the type to leave, not without a fight. She would stay, grasping at the hope that we could somehow fix this. But she didn't understand. There was nothing left to fix. I stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of what was about to happen settle heavily on my shoulders. I walked to the front door, pausing for a moment to take a deep breath before stepping inside. The air in the house felt thick, as if the tension from the night before still lingered in every corner. Lily sat at the kitchen table, staring down at her phone, but the moment I walked in, she looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her face pale. "You came back," she said softly, her voice full of fragile hope. I didn't respond right away. I stood there for a moment, taking her in, trying to reconcile the woman sitting in front of me with the woman I had loved for years. But I couldn't. Too much had happened between us. "I didn't come back for us," I said, finally, my voice steady but cold. "I came back to get things in order." Her eyes dropped, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her phone. I know you're angry. I know I messed up, but we can still… No. I cut her off before she could say anything else. We can't, Lily. We're done. Last night wasn't just some mistake, it was the truth finally coming out. You've been lying to me for months, and whatever we had, it's gone. I can't forgive that. She blinked, her face a mix of shock and sadness, as if she hadn't expected me to be so final. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but then she shut it again, as if realizing there was nothing left to say. The pain in her eyes was unmistakable, but I didn't feel anything for her anymore. She had made her choices. So, what now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I sat down across from her, feeling strangely calm. We end this. I'll get a lawyer. We'll split the house and the finances. I'll move out as soon as I can find a place. We don't need to drag this out. She nodded slowly, looking down at her hands. I guess I knew this was coming, she murmured, her voice low. But I didn't think it would end like this. Neither did I admitted. But deep down, I had known something was wrong for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to accept it. For the next hour, we talked logistics. It felt sterile, almost like a business transaction. Who would keep the house, how we'd divide the money, the next steps for the divorce. Lily tried to keep it together, but I could see the cracks in her composure. Every so often, she'd glance up at me, her eyes filled with guilt, like she wanted to say something that would undo all of this. But she didn't, because deep down, she knew there was nothing left to say. When we were done, I stood up, ready to leave. I had already packed what I needed the night before, and I didn't want to stay in this house any longer than I had to. As I grabbed my bag, Lily stood too, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking, for everything. I never meant to hurt you. I looked at her, but the words felt empty now, meaningless. They didn't change what had happened. I know, I said quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. But it's too late for that. Without another word, I walked out the door, leaving the life we had built behind. I didn't know where I was going yet, maybe to Ryan's place, maybe to a hotel until I figured things out. But as I drove away, one thing became clear. I wasn't looking back. For the first time, I wasn't consumed by thoughts of how I could have saved our marriage or what I could have done differently. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about what came next, about how I would rebuild. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't scare me. It felt like freedom, and that was enough. The house, the memories, the lies, they were all behind me now. All I had to do was keep driving, keep moving forward, and that's exactly what I did. Later, as I scrolled through my phone, I started deleting photos, one after another. Each picture felt like a reminder of something that had never truly existed, a life I thought we had but never really did. The more I scrolled, the more I realized how much of myself I had invested in someone who wasn't who I thought she was. Eventually, I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet of the moment settle in. There was no going back. I knew that now. No amount of apologies or promises could fix what had been broken. Lily had made her choice, and now I had made mine. This was the first night of my new life alone, and maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. It's over. But this time, I wasn't scared of what that meant.